I stared at the freshly delivered certified letter in disbelief, my coffee going cold beside me. The Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association had officially crossed the line. According to this notice, they were going to convert the empty field adjacent to my property land I was absolutely certain I owned into a seasonal recreational vehicle accommodation zone. In other words, they planned to turn my field into an RV park. My name is Quinn Cooper, and until 6 months ago, I'd been blissfully ignorant about the darker side of HOA politics. My 5-acre property sat at the edge of Sunnyside Estates, a sprawling subdivision in Fairfield County, Connecticut. When I purchased it 3 years ago, the main selling point was the beautiful rolling field that stretched behind my modest farmhouse, perfect for the hobby farm I dreamed of starting. I immediately called my neighbor Ted Williams, who'd lived here for 20 years and understood the HOA's inner workings better than anyone. "They're doing what now?" Ted asked, his voice crackling through my phone's speaker. "Putting in RV spots. 21 of them, according to this letter." "On my field, Ted, my field." "That doesn't sound right. Are you sure that field is entirely your property?" I hesitated. "I mean, I thought so. It was listed in the property description when I bought the place." "Better double-check your deed and property survey, Quinn." Barbara Evans has been looking for ways to generate extra revenue since she became HOA president. She's relentless. Barbara Evans. Just the mention of her name made my blood pressure rise. Since taking over as president of our HOA board 6 months ago, she'd implemented strict new rules about everything from mailbox heights to the acceptable shades of beige for exterior house paint. Her crowning achievement was a $15,000 illuminated neighborhood sign that nobody wanted, but everybody paid for through special assessment fees. After hanging up with Ted, I dug through my filing cabinet for my property documents. The deed described the boundaries, but without markers, I couldn't be certain where my land ended. I needed the original survey. 2 days and several frantic calls to my real estate agent later, I was sitting in the county records office, thumbing through the official survey of my property. What I discovered left me speechless. The field was indeed mine, most of it anyway. But there was a thin strip, approximately 20 feet wide, running along the western edge that technically belonged to the HOA as common area. It was barely noticeable on the map, but it gave them just enough legal standing to access the field. They couldn't put RV spots on my property, but they could use that strip as an access point to develop adjacent HOA common land. I called my lawyer, Dexter Simmons, immediately. "They can't just convert green space into an RV park," I insisted. "There must be zoning restrictions." "I'll look into it," Dexter promised. "But don't underestimate Barbara Evans. She's married to a county commissioner and has connections at City Hall." While Dexter investigated, I received another notice. Construction would begin in 2 weeks. The seasonal RV accommodation would open on Memorial Day weekend and close after Labor Day, generating revenue through rental fees from visiting relatives of Sunnyside residents and approved community members. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to voice my objections. The community center was packed with neighbors, many looking as confused as I felt about the sudden RV park plan. Barbara Evans sat at the center of the board table, her platinum blonde bob perfectly styled, a string of pearls resting against her pink cardigan. At 55, she carried herself with the authority of someone used to getting her way. Beside her was Walter Johnson, the meek treasurer who never contradicted her, and Patricia Miller, the secretary who documented every meeting with zealous attention to detail. "The next item on our agenda," Barbara announced, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of syrupy sweetness and steel, "is the update on our exciting new Sunnyside seasonal recreation vehicle facility." I raised my hand immediately. Barbara pretended not to see me. "We've secured the necessary permits," she continued, "and construction will begin next Monday. The revenue projection for the summer season is approximately $62,000, which will fund our community beautification projects without requiring additional member contributions. Several people nodded approvingly. Free money was always popular. "Excuse me," I said, standing up without waiting to be recognized. "I'd like to discuss this project since it directly affects my property." Barbara's smile tightened. "Mr. Cooper, please wait to be called upon. We have procedures." "With respect, Mrs. Evans, you're planning to build an RV park that borders my land without any consultation with me. The development is on HOA common land," Barbara replied coolly. "While we appreciate your concern, your approval isn't required. You're using a 20-foot access strip to reach land behind my property," I countered. "That will significantly impact my privacy, security, and property value." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "The plans have been approved by the board and the county. The access road is on HOA land, and the facility will be tastefully designed to maintain Sunnyside's aesthetic standards." "What about environmental impact, waste management, traffic studies?" I pressed. "All addressed in the comprehensive plan submitted to the county," she replied dismissively. Now, if there are no other questions, other neighbors began raising hands. Barbara quickly moved to end the discussion. "Due to time constraints, we'll have to take any further questions about the RV facility by email. Moving on to our next agenda item." I left the meeting seething. Back home, I called Dexter again. "They've fast-tracked everything," I told him. "Construction starts Monday." "I've checked the permits," Dexter said. "Unfortunately, they appear to be in order. Barbara's husband, Commissioner Evans, expedited the approval process. They're calling it a temporary seasonal facility which has different zoning requirements than a permanent RV park. There must be something we can do." Dexter was silent for a moment. "I'm still looking into a few angles." "But Quinn, I want you to think carefully about how far you want to take this. Fighting the HOA could get expensive and messy." I gazed out my kitchen window at the peaceful field. Soon it would be filled with RVs, strangers, noise, and light pollution. "I want to fight," I said firmly. "All right. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of your property before construction begins. Record any conversations with HOA members. We'll need evidence if this escalates." Monday came, and with it, the construction crew. I watched from my property line as they staked out the access road along the thin strip of HOA land. By Wednesday, they were clearing the area behind my field, beyond where I thought my property ended. I took dozens of photos and videos. On Friday, Dexter called with news. "I've been digging through historical records, Quinn. There's something interesting about your property boundaries." "What did you find?" "The original survey from 1978 shows different boundaries than what's recorded now. There appears to have been a modification in 2002 before you purchased the property. I'm not sure it was properly documented or if the previous owner was even aware." "What does that mean for me?" "It means we need a new survey. A professional one that compares the historical records with the current boundaries. It's not cheap, but it might give us leverage." I agreed immediately and hired Eastern Connecticut Surveying Associates the next day. They couldn't start work until the following week, but assured me they would conduct a comprehensive review of my property boundaries. Meanwhile, construction continued. The access road was graded and partially graveled. Workers began marking spots for RV pads beyond my field. Barbara Evans made a point of walking the site every evening, clipboard in hand, often pausing to smile and wave at me if I was visible in my yard. On one such evening, I decided to approach her directly. "Barbara," I called out, walking toward the property line. "Can we talk about this project neighbor to neighbor?" She turned, her smile firmly in place but not reaching her eyes. "Of course, Quinn. Though I hope you're coming around to seeing the benefits of our community improvement project." "I'm concerned about the impact on my property," I said. "The noise, the traffic, the loss of privacy. My house value will plummet." "On the contrary," Barbara countered, "the additional amenities will increase property values throughout Sunnyside. Change can be difficult to accept, but progress benefits everyone. Progress would be preserving green space, not paving it for RVs. Her smile faltered slightly. The board has made its decision after careful consideration. The facility will operate for just 12 weeks this summer, and the revenue will fund improvements that all residents will enjoy. Including you. I heard the board approved a special management fee for the HOA president to oversee the facility. Barbara's cheeks flushed. That's completely appropriate compensation for the additional responsibilities. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend. As she walked away, I noticed a survey stake that seemed out of place. It was several feet inside what I believed was my property. I took photos, marking the location carefully. The new survey team arrived the following Tuesday. For 2 days, they meticulously measured, consulted historical records, and checked county documents. By Thursday, they had preliminary findings. There's definitely a discrepancy, explained Maria Gonzalez, the lead surveyor. The 2002 adjustment moved your western boundary approximately 18 feet inward, reducing your total acreage by about a quarter acre. The interesting part is that there's no record of the previous owner authorizing or even being notified of this change. How could that happen? I asked. Sometimes these things slip through during administration changes or filing errors. Sometimes they're deliberate. We'll need more time to complete the full analysis, but you may have grounds to contest the current boundary. This news gave me hope, but construction was progressing rapidly. The access road was nearly complete, and workers had begun installing electrical hookups for the RV spots. Memorial Day was just 3 weeks away. Dexter advised me to wait for the complete survey report before taking legal action. If we move too soon with incomplete information, it could weaken our position, he explained. Reluctantly, I agreed to wait. That weekend, I watched as the first concrete pads for the RVs were poured. The peaceful view from my back porch was transforming before my eyes. Monday morning brought another certified letter from the HOA. This one informed me that, due to the proximity of the new facility, I would need to install appropriate visual screening along my property line, specifically an approved 6-foot privacy fence within 30 days, at my expense. I called Dexter immediately. They're requiring me to build a fence now. They can't do that unless it's in the original CC and Articus you agreed to when purchasing the property, he said. Send me the letter and the community guidelines. After reviewing the documents, Dexter confirmed my suspicions. There's nothing in the original guidelines requiring fencing. They've amended the rules specifically for properties adjacent to community recreation facilities. This is targeted directly at you. So I can ignore it. Not exactly. HOA amendments can be enforceable if properly adopted. But we can challenge the amendment process itself. Did they follow proper notification procedures? Was there a required membership vote? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. Ted connected me with Margaret Wu, a former board member who had resigned in protest when Barbara took over. The amendment wasn't voted on by the membership, Margaret confirmed when we met for coffee. Barbara pushed it through as a board clarification of existing rules. That's her typical approach, reinterpreting guidelines instead of following the amendment process. Armed with this information, Dexter sent a formal letter challenging both the fence requirement and the boundary issue. We requested a halt to construction pending resolution of the property line dispute. The HOA's response came through their attorney, a stern letter stating that the construction would continue as planned and that failure to install the required fencing would result in daily fines. Additionally, they dismissed our boundary concerns as without merit and an obvious delay tactic. The final survey report arrived 2 days later, confirming what we suspected. The 2002 boundary adjustment had reduced my property without proper documentation or consent from the previous owner. More importantly, the report indicated that several of the planned RV pads appeared to encroach on what should legally be my land. "This is it," Dexter said when I forwarded the report. "We have grounds for an emergency injunction to stop construction. I'll file first thing tomorrow." That evening, I was working in my garden when Barbara Evans and 2 other board members appeared at my property line. "Mr. Cooper," Barbara called out, "we need to discuss your continued obstruction of community improvements." I set down my garden tools and walked over. "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm protecting my property rights. Your selfishness is delaying a project that benefits everyone," she said, her voice carrying so neighbors could hear. "The HOA has been more than accommodating. You're building an RV park on land that rightfully belongs to me, and then demanding I pay for a fence to hide it." Barbara's face hardened. "The boundaries were established long before you purchased this property. Your frivolous legal maneuvers won't change that." "We have evidence the boundaries were improperly altered," I replied, "and we're filing for an injunction tomorrow." Walter Johnson, the treasurer, looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should consider postponing construction until this is resolved," he suggested to Barbara. She shot him a withering look. "Absolutely not. The facility opens Memorial Day weekend as planned. The deposits have been accepted and contracts signed." I raised an eyebrow. "You've already sold spots before construction is even complete." "Pre-leasing is standard practice," Barbara snapped. "And none of this concerns you. Install your fence by the deadline or face the consequences." They left, but not before I noticed Barbara taking photos of my unfenced property line with her phone, presumably documenting my violation. The next day, Dexter filed for an emergency injunction. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, just days before the facility was set to open. In the meantime, construction continued at a frantic pace. Workers were on site from dawn until dusk, racing to complete the project. I decided to do some investigating of my own. Through public records requests, I obtained copies of the RV facility permits and the HOA's financial projections. What I found was troubling. The permits listed Sunridge Recreational Management as the operator of the facility, a private LLC registered to none other than Barbara and Richard Evans. The HOA would receive only 30% of the revenue, while Sunridge would collect 70% as the management company. I shared this information with Dexter and several trusted neighbors. Word spread quickly through the community. Suddenly, people who had been indifferent to my boundary dispute were asking questions about the financial arrangement. The night before our court hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. Patricia Miller, the HOA secretary, stood nervously on my front porch. "I shouldn't be here," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "But you need to see these before tomorrow's hearing." She handed me a folder containing board meeting minutes, not the sanitized versions distributed to residents, but her original notes. They documented Barbara's systematic manipulation of the process, from the boundary issue to the creation of Sunridge Recreational Management. "She told us it was all legal," Patricia said, "that the HOA's attorney had approved everything. But I checked, and he never reviewed the management contract or the boundary issue." "Will you testify to this?" I asked. Patricia paled. "I can't. My husband works for Commissioner Evans, but those are official records. They speak for themselves." The next morning, I met Dexter at the courthouse with Patricia's documents and my own evidence. The HOA's attorney, a polished man named Gregory Taft, appeared confident as we entered the courtroom. Barbara sat beside him, immaculately dressed and seemingly unconcerned. Judge Marilyn Torres reviewed the filings before addressing us. "This is an unusual case. Mr. Cooper alleges improper boundary modifications and HOA overreach, while the HOA claims full authority for its actions. Before I rule on the injunction, I'd like to hear directly from both parties." I testified first, explaining the boundary discrepancy, the rushed construction, and the financial arrangement with Barbara's private company. I submitted the survey report and Patricia's meeting minutes as evidence. When Barbara took the stand, her composure wavered as the judge questioned her about Sunridge recreational management. The board was fully informed, Barbara insisted. It's a standard management arrangement. Did you disclose to the board that you and your husband are the sole owners of Sunridge? Judge Torres asked. That wasn't relevant to the decision-making process, Barbara replied stiffly. Judge Torres frowned. And the boundary adjustment from 2002, can you explain how that occurred? That predates my involvement with the HOA, Barbara said. The current boundaries are the ones recorded with the county. But the survey evidence suggests those recordings were made without proper authorization, the judge noted. By the end of the hearing, Judge Torres granted a temporary injunction halting further construction until the boundary dispute could be fully resolved. She also ordered the HOA to provide all documentation related to the 2002 boundary change and the RV facility contracts. It was a significant victory, but as Dexter reminded me, only the first step in what could be a lengthy legal process. The construction stopped, but the partially completed facility with its gravel access road and concrete pads remained an eyesore behind my property. 2 days later, Barbara called an emergency HOA meeting. The community center was packed, with residents standing along the walls. The mood was tense as Barbara tried to explain the judge's ruling. This temporary setback will not deter us from delivering the promised amenities, she declared. The board is confident the legal issues will be resolved in our favor. From the back of the room, Ted called out, "What about the management contract with your private company? Was that disclosed to members before you started accepting deposits?" Barbara's face flushed. The management arrangement was approved by the board and is entirely appropriate. Another neighbor stood up. I paid $500 to reserve a spot for my daughter's RV over the 4th of July weekend. Where's that money now, in the HOA account or your company's? The meeting devolved into chaos as more residents demanded answers. Walter Johnson, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally stood up. As treasurer, he announced, I must inform the membership that I was not fully aware of the financial structure of this project. I've requested a full audit of all transactions related to the RV facility. Barbara abruptly adjourned the meeting, but the damage was done. Residents followed her to the parking lot, demanding refunds and explanations. I watched from a distance, taking no pleasure in her discomfort despite our adversarial relationship. This wasn't just about my boundary dispute anymore, it was about HOA governance and financial transparency. The following week brought an unexpected development. The county commissioner's office announced that Richard Evans was taking a leave of absence pending an ethics investigation into his role in expediting permits for the RV facility without disclosing his financial interest. Barbara became scarce around the neighborhood. The partially built facility sat abandoned, a monument to overreach and mismanagement. Several board members privately approached me about reaching a settlement. "What do you want, Quinn?" Walter asked during one such conversation. The HOA can't afford prolonged litigation, especially with the refunds we're now processing. I considered the question carefully. First, I want my property line restored to its original boundaries. Second, I want the RV facility project permanently abandoned and the land returned to green space. Third, I want assurance that nothing like this can happen again. Walter nodded. The first two are achievable, the third might require bylaw changes. Then let's propose them, I suggested. Increased transparency, membership votes on major expenditures, conflict of interest policies. With Walter and several other board members now allies, we drafted a settlement agreement and bylaw amendments. Barbara, facing mounting pressure from all sides, reluctantly agreed to resign as president. The settlement included restoration of my original property line, removal of the RV pads and hookups, and a commitment to maintain the area as protected green space. The HOA also agreed to pay my legal fees and the cost of the professional survey. As summer progressed, construction equipment returned this time to dismantle what had been built. The concrete pads were broken up, the electrical hookups removed, and the access road partially restored to its natural state. Seeds for native wildflowers were sown across the disturbed earth. In August, at a specially called membership meeting, the community voted overwhelmingly to approve the new bylaws. Transparency requirements, conflict of interest disclosures, and membership approval for major expenditures became mandatory. A new board was elected, with Ted as president and Margaret Wu returning as vice president. Barbara and Richard Evans put their house on the market in September and moved to Florida by October. The ethics investigation into Richard's conduct resulted in a formal reprimand and a fine, but no criminal charges. Standing in my field on a crisp October morning, watching the last of the wildflower seeds being scattered where RV pads had briefly existed, I reflected on the past 6 months. The battle had been stressful and costly in many ways, but the outcome felt worth it. Ted joined me, surveying the restored land. "You know," he said, "you could have just let them build it, waited until they invested everything, and then dropped the property line bombshell." "Would have cost them a lot more," I chuckled. I considered it briefly, but this was never about revenge. It was about doing things right, following the rules. "Isn't that what an HOA is supposed to be about?" Ted nodded thoughtfully. The irony doesn't escape me. "You used their own rulebook against them." "Not against them," I corrected. "For all of us. This place is our community. We should protect it together, not exploit it for personal gain." As winter approached, the HOA installed discrete markers along the properly restored boundary of my property. The field lay dormant, waiting for spring to bring the wildflowers to life. In my mailbox, I found the last quarterly newsletter of the year. Under Community Updates, a simple announcement read: "The eastern field has been designated as protected green space in perpetuity, ensuring natural beauty for generations of Sunnyside residents to come." It wasn't until the following spring that I learned the full extent of Barbara's scheme. Walter, now comfortable in his role as board treasurer, shared findings from the forensic audit. Barbara and Richard had planned to expand the seasonal RV facility each year, eventually creating a year-round operation that would have generated substantial profits for their management company while using HOA common land and resources. "The property line issue was your salvation," Walter admitted. "Without that, they might have succeeded. The permits were in order, technically legal even with the conflict of interest." By May, the wildflowers bloomed across the field, creating a patchwork of colors visible from my back porch. Neighbors often stopped to admire the view while walking the new community trail that respectfully skirted the edge of my property, installed with my enthusiastic permission. On Memorial Day weekend, 1 year after the RV facility was supposed to open, the HOA hosted a community picnic in the newly designated Sunnyside Nature Preserve. Children flew kites in the field where RVs would have parked. Families spread blankets among the wildflowers. Ted made a brief speech about community stewardship, careful not to mention the controversy directly, but acknowledging that sometimes the path to the right outcome isn't straightforward. As I helped set up the grills for the community barbecue, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. "Are you Quinn Cooper?" she asked. "I am," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. "I'm Amanda Lewis. We almost bought the Evans house last fall." She gestured toward the field. "Barbara told us this would all be an RV park by now, said it would be convenient for visitors." She smiled. "I'm glad it isn't. This is much better." "We think so too," I agreed. Later that evening, as the picnic wound down and neighbors drifted home in the golden light of sunset, I walked the perimeter of my property. The new boundary markers gleamed in the fading light, small but significant reminders of what had been at stake. Ted joined me for the final stretch, both of us carrying trash bags from the cleanup. "You know what Barbara used to say?" he asked. "Rules exist for a reason." Funny how she only meant that when the rules benefited her. I nodded. The rules do matter. But so does the spirit behind them. An HOA should build community, not divide it. Well, mission accomplished, Ted said, gesturing to where the last few families were gathering their belongings, calling to children who wanted just 5 more minutes to play. This is what it's supposed to look like. As the year progressed, our HOA became something of a local model. Neighboring communities consulted with Ted and the board about transparency measures and member involvement. The county even adopted some of our conflict of interest provisions for its own permitting process. The following spring, I finally started my long-planned hobby farm on the eastern portion of my property, far from where the RV facility would have been. A small greenhouse, raised garden beds, and a chicken coop. The HOA guidelines had to be amended slightly to accommodate the chickens, but the membership voted overwhelmingly in favor. On the 1-year anniversary of Judge Torres's injunction, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a deed. The thin strip of HOA land along my western boundary had been officially transferred to me, with a note from the board. To ensure this never happens again, unanimously approved by membership vote. The gesture was largely symbolic since the new bylaws already protected the area, but it meant something significant. The community had learned from Barbara's overreach and was determined to prevent history from repeating itself. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't discovered the boundary discrepancy, or if I'd chosen not to fight. Would the RV facility have expanded as Barbara planned? Would other neighbors have eventually raised concerns about the financial arrangement? Or would it have become an accepted part of Sunnyside Estates, another amenity listed in real estate advertisements? I'll never know for certain. What I do know is that standing up for property rights, mine and the community's, was worth every difficult moment. The field behind my house remains open and natural, home to wildflowers and kites rather than recreational vehicles. The boundary markers stand as quiet sentinels, reminding us all that lines exist for a reason, but community thrives when we respect not just the lines themselves, but the people on both sides of them. 3 years have now passed since that first certified letter arrived. Barbara and Richard Evans remain in Florida, apparently involved in a new development project there. I hope they've learned something from their Sunnyside experience, but I'm not counting on it. People like Barbara tend to see rules as obstacles to overcome rather than frameworks that protect everyone. As for me, I've joined the HOA Architectural Review Committee, something I never imagined doing. My experience has given me perspective on the balance between individual property rights and community standards. I'm known as fair but thorough, always asking the crucial question: who benefits from this decision? The wildflowers in the field have multiplied and spread, creating new patterns each spring. The community trail sees constant use: joggers in the morning, families in the evening, stargazers at night. What could have been a summer's worth of RV traffic has instead become a permanent natural refuge. Sometimes, standing at my property line as the sun sets over the field, I think about how close we came to losing this view. How a few feet on a survey map nearly changed everything. How easily rules can be twisted when no one is paying attention. And then, I remind myself that paying attention is exactly what neighbors are supposed to do, not to police each other's choices, but to protect the community we've all chosen to call home. That's the lesson of Sunnyside Estates, written in property lines and wildflowers, in bylaws and boundary markers. Not a story of victory over an overzealous HOA president, but a reminder that communities thrive when everyone's rights are respected, even when it would be easier to look the other way.